What would you do if the love you lost walked back into your life carrying someone else's child? And what if the past you buried still knew how to look you in the eyes without saying a word? Elliot Green had everything: a name built on power, a skyline view, and a life curated for control. Until one dinner changed everything. He saw her again, June, his ex-wife, the woman he let go when ambition spoke louder than love. But this time, she wasn't at a gala or a gallery. She was serving his table, pregnant. Whose baby is she carrying? Why is she working here? And why does one look from her still feel like the truth he's been running from? As old wounds reopen and new truths emerge, Elliot must confront the life he chose and the woman he never stopped loving. Can a second chance be earned when you were the one who walked away? If you believe in redemption without perfection, in stories that unfold quietly but stay with you long after, then this one is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because sometimes the people we once lost are the ones who teach us how to come home. Now let's begin. The air inside the evergreen table was calm, touched by soft jazz, drifting from the live pianist near the fireplace. Gold-toned lighting kissed the corners of the room, catching glints from polished glasses and quiet laughter. It was the kind of place where success wore cufflinks and fine perfume, where conversations stayed hushed and the wine never stopped breathing. Elliot Green sat at a corner booth, a prime seat for those who didn't like to be seen, but never failed to be noticed. His tailored navy suit fit like a second skin, and the glimmer of his platinum watch caught the eye of nearly every passerby. Beside him sat Vanessa Hale, sharp as crystal in her emerald dress, her smile framed perfectly by cherry lipstick. She leaned in slightly, her voice velvet and amused. They really went all out with this place. Huh, she said, twirling her wine glass. I heard it's where city deals are sealed and divorces are softened by dessert. Elliot chuckled, the sound low and almost reluctant. I suppose I needed somewhere fitting to celebrate closing the Meriton merger, he replied, sipping his scotch. And you deserved a little sparkle. Vanessa's eyes softened, though something about the way Elliot spoke made her watch him a beat longer than necessary. He was here present, but not quite. Then it happened. Out of the corner of his eye, Elliot noticed a server approaching the next table. There was nothing remarkable at first: dark uniform, hair tied back. But as she turned, balancing a tray with the ease of habit, something hit him. A pause in the air, a twist in his stomach. It couldn't be, but it was. June Whitaker. She hadn't seen him yet. Her face was thinner, older in a way time allows only to those who've endured rather than aged. Her eyes, once bright with mischief and architectural blueprints, now carried the faint, beautiful weight of quiet survival. And then there was something else, something unmistakable. June was pregnant. Her black apron couldn't hide the gentle roundness beneath. The baby bump wasn't new, it was established, confident in its place, like it had been there for months. Elliot's chest tightened. He blinked, wondering if it was a trick of the dim lighting or the whiskey. But no, it was her. And she was carrying a child. Vanessa kept talking about a new gallery she wanted to visit, her words dancing through the air like background music Elliot couldn't quite tune into. His eyes stayed on June as she walked past their table toward the bar. She hadn't looked up yet, and then she did. For a brief second, their eyes met. 1,000 words passed between them in absolute silence. No smile, no nod, just recognition, shock, and something else, resentment. No, hurt maybe, but also stillness. As if the world narrowed to just them, like it once had on a rainy afternoon 10 years ago, when they danced barefoot in the kitchen of their first apartment. June looked away first. Vanessa noticed. You okay? She asked. Her brow gently creased. Elliot shifted in his seat. Yeah, just thought I saw someone I knew. Vanessa followed his gaze toward the bar, then turned back. Someone from work. He paused a second too long. No, just old times. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, she picked up the menu. So, you're recommending the duck confit. Or should I go wild and try the seared halibut? But Elliot wasn't listening. He was watching June, now pouring a glass of wine at the service counter, her shoulders held with quiet pride. She looked calm, composed. But there was something in the way she blinked slow, steady, that reminded him of the night she packed her bags and left. No yelling, just silence and a door closing behind her. And now, years later, she was here pregnant, working late at a high-end restaurant and pretending not to notice him. Elliot cleared his throat, turning back to Vanessa. "Try the halibut," he said, forcing a smile. "It's worth the risk." But his appetite was gone. As the pianist slipped into a soft rendition of Autumn Leaves, Elliot's thoughts slipped further. Not into nostalgia, but something heavier. What happened to her? Who is the father? Is she okay? He didn't want to ask himself these things. Not now. Not here. But June's presence had pulled a thread loose inside him, and everything he had tightly wound for years, the business, the control, the life of compartments, began to fray. Vanessa excused herself to the restroom, and Elliot sat alone at the table, staring into his untouched scotch. Across the room, June passed again. She didn't look at him this time, and somehow, that hurt even more. The drive home was quiet. Elliot had offered to take Vanessa back to her apartment, but she declined, saying she had an early morning shoot. She kissed him goodnight with that same sweet restraint she used when she sensed he wasn't really there. He appreciated her grace, even as it deepened his guilt. Now, the hum of the engine was the only sound in his car, a sleek electric model that glided down the road like a whisper. City lights blurred past him, gold, red, and silver reflections slipping across the windshield like memories he didn't want to remember. But June's face had carved itself into his mind again. He couldn't shake the image, the loose strands of her dark hair falling from her bun, the quiet sadness behind her eyes, the quiet curve of her belly. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing her again, it was the weight of everything left unsaid between them. Years ago, she had loved him with a gentleness that disarmed him. June Whitaker had never needed extravagance. She was content with cracked ceramic mugs and houseplants on sunlit windowsills. She had a gift for seeing potential in things others discarded: old chairs, rundown houses, even people. Maybe that was why she fell in love with Elliot, back when he was still clawing his way out of obscurity. They'd met at a charity gala downtown. She'd been there on behalf of a non-profit design firm, pitching a renovation project for a women's shelter. He was one of the minor donors, wearing a suit too expensive for someone still paying off college loans. What struck him that night wasn't just her beauty, it was how certain she was in her convictions. She talked about architecture like it was a form of justice, like beauty could be a balm for brokenness. He had admired that, needed it, even. For years, they built a life together in quiet harmony. Morning coffee routines, late-night planning of their future house, a dog named Chester, laughter while painting the guest room wall a shade of green she later admitted to hating. But ambition is a demanding master. When Elliot's consulting firm landed its first major corporate client, everything shifted. The hours grew longer, the flights more frequent. He told himself it was temporary, that once the foundation was laid, they'd travel more, spend time, have children, but time, unlike money, doesn't compound, it vanishes. And June, steady and clear-eyed, finally asked, "When do we become part of your plan?" Back in his penthouse now, Elliot poured himself a glass of water and sat by the tall windows that overlooked Brookridge's skyline. It was everything he once dreamed of. Floor-to-ceiling glass, smart lighting, walls lined with curated art, a space designed to impress. And yet tonight, it felt like a hotel suite, temporary, untouched by real life. He opened his phone, scrolling through old photos out of habit. One caught his attention. June, barefoot, standing on a ladder in their old apartment, trying to hang a frame. She was laughing. He must have said something, and her hand was caught midair, as if frozen in that small, glowing joy. He hadn't looked at that picture in years. It had once been a favorite. A notification buzzed, a message from Vanessa. "Hope you got home safe. You seemed distracted tonight. Let's talk soon. No pressure. Good night." Elliot sighed. She deserved honesty, but he wasn't ready to explain something he barely understood himself. Instead, he opened another app, his contact list, June Whitaker. Still saved, still untouched since the day she left. His thumb hovered over her name, his chest tightening. What would he even say? Hi, saw you pregnant and serving wine tonight. Want to talk? He locked the phone and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. What if the baby wasn't his? What if she had moved on, and this life of waiting tables was just temporary, a bridge between where she had been and where she was headed? Or worse, what if it was his, and she hadn't told him why somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m.? Elliot found himself pacing. He pulled open a drawer in the den and retrieved an old journal, a relic from when he still believed writing things down would help him feel something deeper. The pages smelled faintly of old ink and dust. He flipped through entries from years ago. Most were work notes, a few ramblings about business goals. But then one line stopped him cold. She's slipping away, and I don't know how to hold her without putting down everything else I'm carrying. He closed the book slowly. The truth, he realized, wasn't that June had left him. He had let her go, with every missed dinner, every unreturned call, every this can wait that turned into never. And now, here she was, quietly surviving, carrying life, and walking straight past him like a stranger. It was what he deserved. Wasn't it outside? The city settled into sleep, but inside Elliot's heart, something long dormant stirred. Not guilt, not regret, longing, not just for June, but for the man he used to be when he was with her. The man who laughed more easily, who came home smelling like paint and coffee, who believed in something other than the next deal. He looked out at the city lights, wondering how many windows hid stories like his unfinished, echoing, unresolved. He didn't know what he was going to do next, but he knew this. He couldn't look away anymore. Elliot returned to the evergreen table 2 nights later. He told himself it was for the food, that he owed Vanessa another evening out to make up for the one he had mentally missed. But the truth had less to do with cuisine and more to do with curiosity unsettled, inconvenient, and undeniable. Vanessa, always perceptive, said nothing when he suggested returning to the same restaurant. She simply raised an eyebrow and asked, "Same booth?" He nodded. The hostess seated them at the familiar corner, dim, quiet, safe. A table made for secrets. The pianist had changed. This one played with less polish, but more soul, and each note seemed to press gently against Elliot's ribs. Vanessa set her purse down carefully and glanced around. "You sure you're not trying to make this a tradition?" she asked, with a half smile. "You seemed off last time we were here." Elliot hesitated. "Yeah, it's been a long week, that's all." But even as he said it, his eyes were scanning the floor, looking, waiting. And then there she was, June, tonight. Her hair was pulled into a neater bun, and her blouse fit a little tighter around her growing stomach. She moved with purpose, but there was a weariness to her stride, as if each shift cost her more than just time. Vanessa followed his gaze. She didn't say anything at first, just observed. "Isn't that the same server from before?" she asked casually, lifting her glass. Elliot nodded, too slowly. "Do you know her?" He glanced down at his napkin, then folded it without thinking. "We used to, a long time ago." Vanessa's hand paused mid-sip. "Used to..." "She's my ex-wife," Elliot said. "Finally." "Her name is June." The words dropped between them like glass, slipping off the edge of a table. June hadn't noticed them yet. She was taking an order at a nearby table, nodding politely, her hand resting subtly on her lower back, an unconscious gesture, but one that pierced Elliot more deeply than he expected. Vanessa stared at him, her voice low. "You didn't think to mention that the other night I wasn't sure what to say." "It surprised me, I'll bet." There was no sarcasm in her voice, just restraint measured and practiced. Vanessa had never been a woman who needed to raise her voice to make herself heard. "She's pregnant," she added, almost like a question. Elliot looked away. "Yeah. Is it yours?" He turned back to her, eyes sharp. I don't know. Vanessa studied him. Do you want it to be? That silenced him. He didn't know how to answer. Not truthfully. Not in a way that wouldn't hurt her. A few moments later, June approached their table. Her eyes met Elliot's, but she didn't flinch. She didn't smile either. Good evening, she said, her voice even quiet. Can I get you started with drinks? Vanessa spoke first. I'll have a glass of your Cabernet. The boldest one you've got. June jotted it down, then looked at Elliot. Sparkling water, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. June nodded, her eyes flickering to his just long enough to stir something old and buried. She turned and walked away without another word. Vanessa let out a breath through her nose, then picked up the menu. Well, she said, this is a twist I didn't expect. Elliot offered no defense. He wasn't sure one existed. Dinner unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. They ordered. June brought their meals with quiet efficiency. There were no lingering looks, no subtle exchanges, just the occasional moment when Elliot caught her brushing a hand across her belly or wincing slightly as she lifted a tray. The food was exquisite. Neither of them tasted it. Vanessa tried. Bless her. She made light conversation about an art fair, a vacation idea, a potential move. But Elliot's responses were lukewarm, automatic. Finally, she set her fork down and leaned in, her tone soft but pointed. Elliot, I'm not mad that your ex-wife works here. I'm not even mad that you didn't tell me right away. But I do need to know something. He looked up. Are you still in love with her? It was the first time the question had been spoken aloud. The words sounded foreign and heavy, like they belonged in a different conversation, in a different decade. Elliot didn't answer, and that, in itself, was an answer. After dessert, Vanessa barely touched hers. They left the restaurant. Elliot opened the car door for her, out of habit, but the air between them had cooled. Let me know if you figure it out, she said softly before slipping into the passenger seat. He didn't follow her inside when he dropped her off. He didn't offer to. Instead, he drove through the city for an hour, no destination in mind, replaying the night over and over. He had built his life on structure, on clean lines and strategic decisions. But now, none of that was helping. Because somewhere between the menu and the wine, between the questions and silence, he realized something he wasn't ready to face. He hadn't stopped caring, not really, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure what to do about it. The following morning, the city hummed with purpose. Executives scurried through revolving doors, coffee shops buzzed with early deals, and phones lit up with calendar alerts before the sun fully broke through the glass towers. From the 39th floor of the Green and Langston building, Elliot Green stood before the window of his corner office, untouched espresso cooling behind him. Below, Brookridge moved like clockwork, but inside him, nothing ticked right. He had just come from the firm's celebratory breakfast. Smiles, speeches, polished suits, clinking mimosa flutes over the finalization of the Meriton deal, a merger 5 years in the making. People had congratulated him like he'd just landed on the moon. His assistant Claire had printed a framed article from the Financial Standard, Green delivers again, the man who turns stone into gold. He had nodded politely, offered thanks, posed for pictures, but every smile felt like a lie told to his own face. Sitting at the head of the conference room table, listening to board members toast him, all he could think of was June and the way she had placed that water glass before him 2 nights ago with such practiced neutrality, it stung. He wondered if she had once looked at him like that. At the end, calm, silent, already gone. Back at his desk, Elliot opened his laptop but couldn't focus. The numbers meant nothing today. He scrolled through emails, clients, investors, suppliers, but all of it blended into digital white noise. He stood again, walking to the window. Brookridge looked just as it had yesterday, imposing, impressive, but something inside him felt brittle, like the celebration had hollowed him out further, not filled him. For the first time in a long time, he asked himself, what is all this for? He remembered the first time he showed June this office. The windows hadn't been installed yet. It was just raw concrete and echoes. She'd looked around, her fingers brushing the frame of what would one day be his office door. "Big dreams," she'd said. "But don't forget to make space for a life in here, too." He had laughed then, too busy imagining the desk, the skyline, the recognition. Now. He looked around, the leather chairs, the curated art, the silent phone. Where was the life? Elliot sat and pulled out his personal notebook, rarely used these days. Its pages had once been home to ideas, ambitions, quotes that moved him. Now. He flipped to a blank page and wrote 3 words. What matters now? He stared at them for a long time. Then underneath, in smaller letters, when did success become the excuse for absence? A gentle knock on the door. Claire entered, tablet in hand. "Mr. Green, just checking, should I confirm the Rosedale investor lunch for Friday?" He blinked. "What? Oh, not yet." She hesitated. "Are you okay?" He looked at her, really looked. Claire had been with him since the firm's early days, steady, sharp, efficient, but even she had begun to notice the cracks in his facade. "I'm fine, just a lot in my head today." She nodded and stepped back. "Well, when you're ready." The door clicked shut behind her. That evening, Elliot sat alone in his penthouse. The city pulsed outside, but the silence inside was complete. He poured a drink, then changed his mind and let the glass sit untouched. Instead, he opened his laptop and searched something he hadn't in years. June Whittaker Architecture. The site was down. The domain expired. No recent mentions on LinkedIn. Her online presence had thinned to nothing. He checked social media, she wasn't there either. Just old images from years ago, an office opening, a feature in Design Monthly, a photo of her smiling beside a community center she helped rebuild. Everything since then vanished. And it struck him like a punch to the chest. She had started over and left no breadcrumbs. He leaned back, the shadows deepening around him. The apartment, once a symbol of what he had earned, now felt sterile. The kitchen had never been used for anything beyond meal prep delivery. The spare bedroom had no bed, just files and unopened boxes. He wandered through the space, room to room, like a visitor in a life someone else had designed. Finally, he stood in the living room, phone in hand, thumb hovering again over the same contact, June Whittaker, still saved, still untouched, but not for long. This time, he didn't call. He simply looked at her name, as if the letters could summon the version of himself he had buried years ago, the man who once came home early just to catch her laugh before bed. Elliot sat on the couch and let himself feel what he had been dodging for months, maybe years. Loneliness was no longer a condition, it was a consequence. And it wasn't just about June. It was about everything he had said no to, every connection he'd allowed to fade, every later that had turned into never. Success hadn't betrayed him. He had just mistaken movement for meaning. As he reached to turn off the lamp, the city shimmered quietly through the glass. He watched it for a long time, and in that moment, Elliot Green celebrated, accomplished, revered, realized that all the towers in the world couldn't shelter a man from the weight of what he'd walked away from. Saturday mornings in Brookridge were quieter than most. The financial core of the city slowed down, giving way to leisurely brunches and farmers' markets. The urgency faded, if only for a day. Elliot found himself parked in front of a cozy brownstone just off Whitmore Street, a part of town he hadn't been to in years. Trees lined the narrow sidewalk, their leaves beginning to turn amber and crimson, brushing the air with hints of autumn. A familiar nameplate rested by the doorbell, Helen Morse, psychotherapist. He hadn't called ahead. He knew better than to schedule this kind of conversation. Helen opened the door with a raised brow and a half-smile. Elliot Green. "Now there's a face I didn't expect to see on my doorstep without a calendar invite," she said, stepping aside to let him in. He offered a faint smile. "I was in the neighborhood." She gave him a look. "You were never one for casual drop-ins. Come in." The living room hadn't changed. Soft, overstuffed furniture. Bookcases overflowing with psychology texts, memoirs, and classic novels. A faint trace of lavender in the air. Helen was the kind of person who made a space feel like you were already halfway healed just by sitting down. He settled into an armchair across from her. "I ran into June," he said quietly. Her expression didn't change. At the evergreen table, he blinked. "You knew?" Helen nodded, sitting with one leg tucked beneath her. "She told me a few weeks ago. She needed work. I knew someone at the restaurant. I helped her get the job." Elliot let the silence hang. "She's pregnant," he said finally. Helen studied him. "And you don't know if it's yours?" "No," he said, then added, "But I need to." Helen tilted her head. "Why now?" "Elliot." He hesitated, fingers laced tightly together. "I don't know. Maybe it's seeing her like that, or maybe I never really let her go." "She let you go," Helen said gently, not unkindly. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, she did." For a moment, the air between them was still. Then Helen sighed. "She's okay, but she's tired. It's been a rough year." "What happened?" he asked. "She left her firm last year, started a design practice of her own, small-scale renovations, community-based projects. It was going well until a few contracts fell through. Clients backed out. She burned through her savings trying to stay afloat." Elliot swallowed. She didn't call for help. She wouldn't. Helen said, "You know June. She's proud, independent. She didn't want a handout, especially not from you." He looked down. "Does she live alone?" Helen hesitated. "Yes." Elliot's jaw clenched. "And the baby, she's raising it herself. The father isn't in the picture. And no, she hasn't said who it is." "But—" Helen paused, as if weighing her words. "I think she hoped it would stay quiet." The thought of June strong, capable, once so full of vision, now waiting tables while preparing for single motherhood, made Elliot's stomach knot. "I don't understand," he muttered. "She used to have so much momentum, so much fire." "She still does," Helen said. "But momentum doesn't always beat circumstance, especially not when you're alone." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Helen softened her voice. "Are you asking because you want to help, or because you want her back?" He looked up, eyes troubled. "I don't know. That's not fair to her. I know." Helen stood and poured them both tea, chamomile. She placed a mug in front of him, then sat again. "She doesn't need rescuing, Elliot, but she could use someone who doesn't leave when things get complicated." The words landed like stones in his chest. He nodded slowly. "I'm not here to save her," he said quietly. I want to know if there's still a place in her life for me. Any place." Helen looked at him, her gaze softer now. "If that's true, start with honesty. Don't come with promises or apologies. Just show up. Without expectation." Elliot sat there for a while after Helen went to take a call, staring into his tea as if it might hold some answer. He hadn't expected to feel this much, not after all this time, not after everything he'd built. But something about knowing June was navigating it all alone while carrying life made every achievement of his feel suddenly small. Maybe the truth wasn't that June had disappeared from his life. Maybe he had disappeared from hers long before she walked away. When he finally stood to leave, Helen returned to the foyer to see him off. "Do me a favor," she said. "Anything. Don't overthink this. Just listen to her. That's what she always needed." Elliot gave a tired smile. "I'm learning." "Well," she said, opening the door, better late than never. Outside, the air was cooler now. Crisp. Honest. Elliot slid into his car, sat in silence, then pulled out his phone. He didn't call June. He just stared at her name again. But this time, something had changed. This time, he knew why he couldn't look away. It was late afternoon by the time Elliot returned to his penthouse. The light filtered through the tall windows, stretching across the wood floors like faded memory. Outside, Brookridge pulsed with the usual weekend rhythm: rooftop brunches, gallery openings, boutique foot traffic, but inside, Elliot stood still, as if he didn't quite belong to the city anymore. He sat at the kitchen island, phone in hand, debating whether to text June. No words felt right. Hope you're well. Too hollow. Do you want to talk? Too forward. Can I see you too much? He typed. Deleted. Typed again. Finally, he set the phone face down on the counter, frustration radiating through his jaw. That night, Vanessa arrived without warning. She let herself in with the key he had given her 6 months ago, a gesture he once thought was meaningful, now tinged with uncertainty. She wore a dark wool coat and a look that said she wasn't here for small talk. Hi, Elliot said, startled, stepping away from the kitchen counter. I tried calling, she replied. You didn't answer. I've been in my head. Vanessa placed her bag down slowly. That seems to be a theme lately. He nodded, unsure how to meet her eyes. I needed to see you, she said, removing her coat. We can't keep doing this polite silence thing. I'm not built for it. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them, once comfortable, now dense. Tell me what's going on, she said. I don't need sugarcoating. I don't need spin. Just the truth. Elliot exhaled. It's June. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. I figured I saw her, unexpectedly. Then again, I spoke to a friend we both used to know. June's not doing well. Financially, she's pregnant. She's alone, and you feel responsible, Vanessa said, voice low. Elliot nodded. Maybe. Or maybe I just can't stop wondering how we ended up on opposite sides of a restaurant, pretending like we were never everything. The words hung between them. Vanessa folded her hands in her lap, her voice calm but deliberate. Elliot, I like you. I've tried to be patient with whatever this is between us, but you've been disappearing, piece by piece. I know, he said softly. I didn't come here to fight, she continued, but I won't compete with a ghost. Or worse, a second chance you're too afraid to admit you still want. He didn't answer, and that silence said enough. Vanessa stood, retrieving her coat. So what now, he asked, rising to meet her. You figure out what you want, she said. Then tell me if I'm still here. After she left. Elliot stood alone in the entryway, the sound of the closing door echoing down the marble hall like a verdict. He walked back to the living room and stared out at the skyline, but it no longer impressed him. It no longer felt earned. That night, he didn't pour a drink, didn't scroll his phone. He sat on the couch in the dark, elbows on knees, head in hands. He wasn't mourning Vanessa, not entirely. He respected her, cared for her, but she had become a mirror to a truth he didn't want to see. He had been living two lives, both dishonest. The next morning brought gray skies and restless thoughts. Elliot dressed in simple clothes, no blazer, no watch. He walked through the city like someone half remembered by it. He passed the fountain where he and June once sat for hours in early spring, sharing pretzels and life goals. He paused at a bakery where she used to buy pistachio croissants. Eventually, his feet took him back to the evergreen table. The hostess recognized him and offered the same table. He declined. I'm not dining. I just need a word with someone, June Whitaker. She hesitated. She's mid-shift. I can't really pull her away. Just let her know I'm here. She can say no. The hostess nodded. 15 minutes later, June emerged through the swinging kitchen door, apron on, eyes wary. She walked over slowly, her tone careful. You can't keep showing up like this. Elliot, I'm not here to make a scene, he said quickly. I just want 5 minutes. Outside, please. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, untied her apron, and gestured toward the side alley. Outside, the air smelled of rain-soaked brick and rosemary from the herb pots near the dumpster. Not exactly romantic, but honest. They stood beneath the steel fire escape, quiet for a beat. You look tired, he said. I am. I heard about the studio, he added. Helen told me. June crossed her arms. Did she tell you everything enough? A pause. The rain started again, lightly. Elliot ran a hand through his hair. Why didn't you tell me about what she said sharply? That I lost everything. That I had to take a waitressing job just to cover prenatal vitamins? That you were alone? June's voice cracked. I've been alone for a while. Elliot, you just didn't notice until now. Elliot stepped closer but stopped himself. I'm not trying to fix the past. I know I can't. But if there's anything I can do now, I want to. Her shoulders stiffened. Don't offer me pity. It's not pity, he said softly. It's regret. And maybe something more. June turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. You don't get to show up now and act like you're the answer. I didn't need you to rescue me. I needed you to stay. Back then. I know, he said, but I didn't. And I hate myself for that. I'm not asking for anything, just let me be around, however you'll allow it. Rain began to fall harder. She looked away, biting her lip. I can't promise anything. I don't need promises, he replied. Just the beginning. She turned back to him slowly, nodding once, then walked inside. And for the first time in years, Elliot stood outside in the rain, not running from it. The alley behind the evergreen table wasn't much, just cracked pavement, a flickering overhead light, and the soft buzz of a nearby street lamp. The scent of rosemary from the potted herbs near the back door lingered in the cool air, mingled with the faint aroma of roasted garlic drifting from the kitchen vents. June leaned against the wall, arms folded across her chest. Her apron was off now, replaced with a simple slate-gray cardigan, sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her hair, slightly frizzy from the rain earlier, framed her face in soft, tired waves. Elliot stood a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his coat, unsure of where to begin. The alley was a strange place for truth, but maybe that made it the perfect one. June spoke first. So, is this going to be a regular thing? You dropping by unannounced. I'm not stalking you, Elliot said quietly. I just can't seem to walk away. Her gaze didn't soften, but it didn't harden either. You walked away before, easily, as I recall. No, he said, not easily, quietly. Maybe, but not easily. She shifted her weight, staring toward the brick wall opposite her. I thought I'd be over it by now, she murmured. Over you, over everything. Maybe I thought I'd buried it deep enough not to find it again. They stood in silence for a moment. Somewhere in the distance, a siren howled and faded. Elliot took a slow step forward. I talked to Helen. June raised an eyebrow. Of course you did. She told me a little about what's been going on. June let out a humorless laugh. Let me guess, pitched me as a fallen architect with too much pride and not enough cash. No, Elliot said. She said you're doing your best, and you're stronger than ever. June blinked at that. I came out here tonight because I wanted to talk to the version of you that doesn't have to pretend everything's fine in front of customers. She crossed her arms tighter. What makes you think that version of me wants to talk to you? I don't know if she does, he said, but I want to talk to her anyway. June looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed and pushed off the wall, walking a few paces to sit on the low stone step beside the back door. After a moment's hesitation, Elliot sat down a few feet away, careful not to crowd her. Rain had left the ground damp, and the air smelled clean. Honest. June didn't speak for a while. She stared at her shoes, then at her hands. When I found out I was pregnant, she said finally, I was scared, not because of the baby, but because I didn't have anyone to tell. No celebration, no tears of joy, just silence. That's what I remember most about those first weeks. Silence. Elliot swallowed. You could have called me. Could I? She asked, turning to him now. You were gone. Elliot. Not just physically. You were emotionally bankrupt, and I was tired of overdrawing on something that never had enough to begin with. He flinched slightly, but didn't argue. I had to build something for myself again. She continued, and I almost did. Until the contracts dried up, until rent came due, until I was buying groceries with discount cards and crying in my car because the baby kicked for the first time and I didn't have anyone to tell. Her voice didn't break, but her eyes did. Elliot felt the guilt settle into his chest like wet cement. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Exactly," she said, voice steady but quiet. "You didn't know. Because you didn't ask. And I didn't tell you. Because I didn't want you to come back out of obligation. I'm not here out of obligation." "June, then why are you here?" He took a breath. "Because you're still the person I measure everything else against." She didn't respond, so he continued. "I thought I needed to build an empire, that if I made it big enough, loud enough, impressive enough, I'd finally feel whole. But I made all that noise just to drown out the quiet where you used to be." June closed her eyes. "You always were poetic when you felt guilty." That made him smile, genuinely, for the first time in days. "I guess guilt sharpened my vocabulary." They sat like that for a while, side by side. Strangers who once shared toothbrushes and Netflix passwords. Lovers who once held dreams in the same bed, and now sat separated by silence, shared only by history. Then June surprised him. "I'm naming him Micah." Elliot turned to her. "Micah." She nodded. "It means, who is like God." "He kicked during a storm once. I took it as a sign." Elliot looked down, his heart stirring in ways he couldn't quite explain. "It's a good name." She glanced at him. "I didn't choose it because it sounded strong. I chose it because it reminded me I wasn't alone, even when I was." Elliot didn't speak. Not for a while. "Then let me be part of this. Somehow, I'm not asking for anything. Just a chance to be present." June hesitated. "You can't just show up once and disappear again. This isn't a story you can dip into when it's convenient." "I know. I mean it." "Elliot, I do, too." Another silence. But this one wasn't sharp. It was tentative, like a bandage being pulled slowly, letting in air for the first time. June stood and adjusted her cardigan. "I have to go back in," she said. Elliot rose, nodded. "Thanks for coming out," he said. She paused at the door, then turned. "Don't make a habit of this," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier edge. And Elliot, for once, read the subtext clearly. It didn't mean go away. It meant, don't disappoint me again. It started with a referral, nothing grand, nothing flashy. Just a quiet email sent to a developer. Elliot trusted a small boutique project on the north side of Brookridge, looking for interior consultation with a sustainable design approach. June Whitaker, he wrote simply, architect turned designer, deep experience in community-centered work, highly recommended. Then he sent 2 more emails, then 5. He never signed them with his title, just E. Green. 3 weeks passed. Elliot didn't visit the evergreen table, not because he didn't want to, but because June had made herself clear showing up wasn't the same as staying present. Instead, he let his actions do the talking. He sat in meetings, nodded through financial forecasts, but his mind often drifted to something far more human than numbers. He found himself Googling birth support for single mothers, prenatal nutrition, modular workspace design for small studios. He wasn't planning a rescue. He was preparing to be useful. One Monday morning, Helen texted him. "You've been busy behind the scenes." He replied only with a thumbs-up emoji. She followed with, "Just don't try to be the hero. She needs a partner, not a pedestal." Elliot smiled. That was the whole point now. Friday evening, early autumn. June stepped out of her temporary studio, a shared space, inside a repurposed shipping warehouse downtown. She wore jeans dusted with paint, and her hair was pulled back with a pencil tucked behind her ear. The sunset painted soft strokes across the skyline as she checked her phone. An email blinked from a local event space looking for a designer. It mentioned a recommendation from someone named E. Green. She stared at the name for a long time. She knew who it was. But what struck her wasn't the gesture, it was the subtlety. There had been no calls, no pressure, no "see what I've done for you," just space, and a hand extended within it. That weekend, June returned to work at the evergreen table. Shorter shifts now. The baby was growing fast. She spotted Elliot, seated discreetly at the bar instead of the corner booth. She hadn't seen him come in. He didn't wave her over, didn't ask to talk. He just nodded when their eyes met. She nodded back. Something about it made her heart shift, almost imperceptibly, not toward romance, not yet, but toward possibility. Later that night, she stepped out back for air, the same alley where they'd spoken weeks ago. The sky above was velvet blue, and the air smelled like basil and baked bread. She wasn't expecting him, but he was there sitting on the same stone step, nursing a lukewarm coffee. "I didn't know you were off tonight," he said. "I switched shifts." Feet were swelling. He stood immediately. "Want to sit?" She nodded. They sat together, the silence between them less stiff than before. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For the referrals. I know it was you." He offered a sheepish shrug. "I figured I owed the world a little good taste." She chuckled, not loudly, but enough for him to hear it. "That's dangerous humility from you," she teased. "I'm evolving," he said, slowly. "Is there any other way worth doing?" They sat in silence a little longer. Then June added, "You've changed." "I'm trying." She nodded. "It shows." She turned toward him, expression unreadable. "I have to ask you something, though. Anything. If the baby was yours, and I'm not saying he is, would it matter?" Elliot took a breath, his gaze steady. "It would change a lot," he said, "but it wouldn't change this. This me wanting to be here. For you. For whatever this becomes. Micah or no Micah." June looked at him for a long time, measuring his words, testing their weight. "I don't want Micah to be a charity case, or a guilt project. I don't see him that way. I won't let anyone come into his life just to soothe their past." "Neither will I," Elliot said, softly. She held his gaze, then nodded. They didn't speak much after that, but something had shifted, not the past, but the path forward. The storm had passed, and in its wake came still water, reflective, quiet, open. As Elliot walked her to her car later, she touched his arm briefly. "Next week," she said, "you can stop by the studio. I might need a second opinion on a lighting plan." He smiled. "I'll bring coffee. No oat milk," she warned. "Still allergic. Still stubborn." They both laughed, and it wasn't weighted with history. It was just a moment, one of many to come. The sunlight over Brookridge was unforgiving that morning, clear, bright, and honest. The kind of light that leaves no shadows, no safe places to hide. Elliot Green sat in his office, jacket slung over the back of his chair, collar open, tie missing. A mug of cold coffee sat untouched beside a half-read email, but his attention was fixed elsewhere. He was staring at the screensaver on his phone, the image of a stone pathway winding through trees, a photo he'd taken during a retreat in Oregon, back when he thought inner peace could be bought with a weekend and a Wi-Fi break. The kind of image you use when you're trying to convince yourself you're okay. The sound of the elevator opening was followed by purposeful footsteps. Vanessa Hale entered without knocking. She looked beautiful, effortless, and composed as always, but her expression was steel beneath silk. "You've been avoiding me," she said flatly. Elliot stood slowly. "Vanessa, I didn't mean don't," she interrupted, her voice too calm to be safe. "Don't give me a half-hearted apology just to buy more time." He gestured toward the chair. "Will you sit?" "No, I won't be long." She looked around his office, the symbols of power, control, strategy, all the things she used to admire, all the things that now felt hollow between them. "I saw you with her," she said. Elliot's breath caught. "We're behind the restaurant, the alley. A friend of mine works there. Said you two were sitting like the world had faded around you." He sighed. "It's not what you think." Vanessa gave a dry laugh. "That phrase always means it's exactly what I think. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did. Not with June, with the silence, the distance, the ghost version of you I've been dating for the past 2 months." He looked down. "I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. You didn't have to explain it. You just had to be honest." The quiet in the room was heavy. Vanessa stepped forward slightly. You said once that you didn't believe in fate. She said, that people make choices, that life is built, not handed to us. He nodded. Well, she continued, this is one of those moments, one of those choices. She paused, folding her arms. Do you want a life with me, Elliot, or are you still chasing something that already passed you by? Elliot's voice was soft, but steady. It didn't pass me by. I left it behind. And now, I want to see if it's still waiting. Vanessa's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away. Then I hope you find what you're looking for. She turned toward the door, pausing only to say, don't call me. Not for a while. Maybe not ever. Then she left. The office was silent again. Not peaceful, not empty, just honest. That evening, Elliot walked home. Not a driver, not a town car, just him. He passed places he'd forgotten: the bookstore where June used to drag him on Sundays, the bench by the bridge where they once talked about starting a family, the fountain where she told him she'd applied for her first architecture license. He wondered how many lives a person could live and abandon in a single city. Back at the penthouse, he stripped off his jacket and opened the balcony doors. The night air greeted him crisp, alive, unapologetic. He didn't turn on any lights. Instead, he grabbed the stack of documents on his desk: merit and financials, investor updates, quarterly targets. And for the first time in a decade, he didn't feel any of it mattered. He placed them back in the drawer and reached instead for something older, a notebook tucked beneath years of distraction. The same one he'd once scribbled in when June left. He opened to a blank page and wrote, "Love doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence." That night, he slept with the window cracked open. And for the first time in years, he didn't dream of boardrooms or contracts. He dreamt of a porch swing, of June reading aloud to a child he hadn't yet met. He woke up with tears on his pillow and sunlight on his face. It didn't feel like regret anymore. It felt like a beginning. The call came just after 2:00. Elliot was awake, sitting in the armchair by the window, bathed in the soft blue hue of city light. A cup of chamomile tea sat cold on the table beside him. He hadn't intended to stay up so late, but his mind had been crowded with quiet thoughts of the past, of June, of Micah, of all the lives that almost were. When the phone lit up, he froze. June Whitaker. His heart jumped, confused and alert. He answered before the second ring. June. Her voice was strained, breathless. Elliot. I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call. He was already reaching for his coat. Tell me where you are. 15 minutes later. Elliot pulled into the small parking lot of Brookridge General Hospital. The world outside was quiet, fog thick around the street lamps. Inside the hospital's maternity wing, fluorescent lights hummed and nurses moved like whispers through wide halls. He found her in triage, wearing a loose hospital gown, her hair clinging to her forehead. She looked small and strong at once, equal parts vulnerability and defiance. I think it's time, she said, trying to smile through the discomfort. Elliot moved to her side without hesitation. She didn't ask for his hand, but she didn't pull away when he offered it. Hours passed in a blur of beeping monitors, whispered encouragements, and the strange suspension of time that only labor brings. June gritted her teeth through each contraction, sweat on her brow, determination in her eyes. Elliot stayed the entire time. He held ice to her lips, rubbed her back when the pain crested, told her she was stronger than she knew, not because she needed to hear it, but because he finally needed to say it. I'm right here, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere. There were moments when June cried from pain, yes, but also from the overwhelming storm of it all. But she never screamed. She never collapsed. She bore it like she had borne everything else in life, with quiet endurance and dignity. At 6:12 a.m., as the first blush of morning painted the hospital windows, Micah Whitaker entered the world. The room was filled with the sharp cry of a newborn and the stunned, shuddering exhale of a mother who had been holding her breath for months. June looked down at her son, tears streaking her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she cradled him for the first time. Elliot stood nearby, barely breathing. She turned to him exhausted, radiant, afraid. Do you want to hold him?" He blinked, caught off guard, his throat thick. "Only if you're sure." She nodded slowly, eyes searching his. "I trust you," she said. He stepped forward and carefully lifted the child swaddled in hospital white, blinking at the newness of the world. Micah's weight in his arms wasn't just physical, it was ancestral, eternal, a life carried by a woman he once lost, now entrusted, if only for this moment, into his hands. Elliot stared into the baby's face and felt something loosen in his chest. Not fear, not pride, hope, pure and quiet. The kind that sneaks in when the noise is gone. Later. The room settled into stillness. Micah slept in the bassinet. June rested, her eyes half closed, the strain of labor giving way to gentle fatigue. Elliot sat beside her. "You didn't have to call me," he said softly. "I know, but you did." June turned her head toward him, voice barely above a whisper. "Because when it mattered, you showed up." Elliot looked at her, this woman he had once thought he knew, now a universe he was only beginning to rediscover. "June," he said, "I know I have no claim, no rights, but I want to be part of his life. However you'll let me, as much or as little as you're willing." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for his hand not with desperation, but with quiet intent. "We'll figure it out," she said, and for Elliot, that was everything. At sunrise, he stood alone by the hospital window, looking out over Brookridge as it stretched awake. The streets glimmered with early light. Buses rumbled. Cafes prepared to open. The city moved forward, but Elliot felt still, not in a frozen way, in a rooted way. For the first time in years, his life wasn't sprinting toward something. It was simply present. And that, he realized, was enough. The days that followed Micah's birth unfolded in a rhythm Elliot had never known: quiet, unglamorous, and profoundly human. He didn't return to work right away. The office called. Meetings were missed. A major client asked why the firm's lead partner hadn't responded to an important proposal. Elliot answered only once: "I'll be offline this week." Something important came up. He didn't elaborate, because for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to explain choosing people over profit. June had returned home 2 days after the birth. Her apartment was modest, warm-toned walls, scattered sketches on clipboards, a faint smell of chamomile and vanilla. It wasn't fancy, but it felt alive in ways Elliot's penthouse never had. He visited every afternoon, never imposing, never expecting. He brought groceries, held Micah so June could shower, walked quietly around the apartment with the baby pressed against his chest, whispering gentle things like, "Your mom is a miracle. You've got strong lungs. Little man. We're all just figuring it out." And somehow, those moments grounded him more than 10 years of strategy ever had. One evening, as he tidied the kitchen while June rested, she spoke from the couch, voice soft. "You're different." He paused mid-wipe, then smiled without turning. "I hope so. No, I mean it," she said. "You used to move through rooms like everything inside. You was 3 steps ahead. Now you're slower. That's a compliment." She laughed lightly. "Yes, it is." He walked over and sat beside her. "Turns out, I like living in real time," he said, not racing toward it. That night, he walked home instead of calling a car. The streets of Brookridge shimmered with soft golden light, and Elliot took them in like they were new, the smell of a bakery still open late, the sound of a couple laughing under an awning, a cab driver humming along to old soul music. He noticed it all. He felt present, not performing, not building an image, just being. At the office the next day, he met with his business partner, Derek Langston. Derek had always been the numbers guy, precise, focused, direct. "You okay?" he asked, scanning Elliot's face. "You look not bad, just different." "I'm okay," Elliot replied. There was a pause. "You're not coming back full time, are you?" Derek asked. Elliot leaned back in his chair. "No, Not in the same way. Derek frowned. You're stepping down. Not stepping away, Elliot said, but stepping back, delegating more, traveling less, being home more. Why? Elliot smiled. Because I finally found something I don't want to miss. That weekend, June invited him over for dinner, just the three of them. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But it was familiar in a new way. She wore a loose sweater and no makeup. Micah cooed in her arms, wide-eyed, his tiny fists waving in the air like he was conducting the music on the radio. Elliot brought a pasta dish he'd learned to make from a YouTube tutorial, slightly overcooked, but edible. They laughed, talked about nothing, shared silence without tension. At one point, June said, I don't know where this is going. Elliot met her eyes. Neither do I, but I'm not going anywhere. As he helped clean up, June leaned against the doorway, watching him dry the dishes. You know, she said, you used to be allergic to routine. I used to be allergic to a lot of things, he replied, glancing at her. Commitment, humility, vegetables. She grinned. Micah will cure you of all three. I think he already has. Later, before he left, Elliot stood by Micah's crib. The baby slept peacefully, one hand curled by his cheek. Elliot reached down and gently tucked the blanket around him. June appeared in the doorway, arms folded, watching quietly. They shared a smile, not heavy with history, just present. Like two people still writing the same story, just in a new chapter. 6 months later, Brookridge was dressed in spring. Dogwood trees bloomed along the sidewalks. Tulips stretched toward clean skies, and cafes spilled their tables into the street like confetti. The city was still itself ambitious, rushing, buzzing, but Elliot moved through it like a man who had finally remembered how to breathe. He no longer lived in the penthouse. He'd sold it quietly and moved into a modest brownstone, a few blocks from June and Micah, not out of obligation, not to be closer, but because it felt right. He wanted a home that echoed with voices, with footsteps, with meals cooked and coffee brewed, not contracts printed and elevators humming. That Saturday, June hosted a small gathering at her apartment, a spring dinner. She called it no particular celebration, just something warm, familiar. She cooked. Elliot helped prep, and Micah babbled from his playmat as the doorbell rang. Helen Morse arrived first, bringing lemon tarts and a bouquet of fresh herbs. Her eyes sparkled when she saw Elliot holding Micah. Well, she said, you clean up nicely. Green. I've traded boardrooms for burp cloths. Elliot replied. You wear both like armor, Helen said, handing him the tarts. But I like this version better. Other friends came too, a couple from June's studio, one of her former professors, and even Derek Langston, surprisingly, who brought a bottle of red and asked if he needed to remove his tie to be let in. No tie required, June said, but shoes off. This is a toddler's domain. Derek raised a brow, then grinned. He's running the place already. Elliot looked over at Micah, proudly gurgling on the carpet. Every inch. The evening passed in easy conversation, soft music, and clinking glasses. At one point, Helen pulled June aside near the kitchen. You look good, she said gently. Lighter. I feel it, June replied. Helen glanced toward Elliot, who was now bouncing Micah in his arms while explaining the importance of spatulas to Derek, who looked wholly unconvinced. You trust him now, I do, June said. Helen tilted her head, and Love June smiled. We're not labeling things, we're just living them. Helen nodded. That counts. Later that night, after the last guest left, June and Elliot stood at the sink, washing the final dishes by hand. June dried while Elliot rinsed, their movements rhythmic and quiet. Thank you, she said. For what? For not rushing this, for not trying to fix everything at once. He paused, then looked at her. I used to think love was about being impressive. Now I know it's about being available. June studied him. You've become someone I could build something with again. I'd like that. Slowly. No other way worth doing. Micah stirred in his crib as they finished. Elliot peeked in and gently adjusted the blanket. June watched him, arms folded, content. Then she said, almost playfully, I think he sleeps better after you visit. Elliot turned, echoing her words from months ago. That's the second time someone said that. They shared a smile deeper this time, more settled. As Elliot prepared to leave, June walked him to the door. Same time tomorrow, he asked. Same time. He stepped onto the porch, then paused. Behind him, June stood in the doorway, bathed in the warm light from inside. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. Her presence open, steady was its own answer. Elliot walked home in the cool night air, tulips nodding gently in the breeze. The city was quiet, in a way that wasn't lonely anymore. He passed the bookstore they once frequented, now with a new window display. It's never too late to begin again. He smiled, later, in his new kitchen. He jotted a note in the same old notebook that had once been filled with missed opportunities and regrets. This time, it simply read, "A life worth living isn't built in a day. It's built in small rooms, with warm hands, and promises kept quietly." In the soft light of morning, June would open her door, and Elliot would be there again. No fanfare, no flowers, just him, holding coffee. Ready. Not every second chance comes with a grand gesture. Sometimes, it arrives in silence in late-night hospital rooms, in half-washed dishes, in someone simply showing up and staying. Elliot didn't need to be a hero, he just needed to be present. And June. She didn't need saving. She needed to be seen not as a burden, not as a woman with a past, but as someone worthy of respect, love, and choice. Their story isn't just about lost love. It's about how easily we overlook someone once they no longer fit our definition of success. It's about the quiet cruelty of judgment and how dangerous it is to measure someone's worth by their paycheck, their job title, or the state of their struggle. Let this story remind us, the single mother behind the register, the man who looks polished but lonely, the neighbor who smiles but aches in silence. They all carry stories worth hearing. If this touched your heart even just a little, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. We're just getting started. More true, powerful, and deeply human stories are waiting. And who knows, the next one might just be yours.